Welcome to the 48th episode of the Hail Mary podcast. I'm AToves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to give our hot takes on our championship win over the Mean Green and throw some Hail Mary shots downfield for our listeners to love or hate. Let's get started. Back-to-back Conference USA champions. Soak that in. Given the drama of the last matchup against North Texas and UTSA's mounting injuries, we expected a hard-fought and physical game. But unlike the last game, we didn't need a dramatic come-from-behind drive to win. This time, bolstered by the third largest crowd in program history, the Roadrunners executed well on all three phases of the triangle. UTSA scored first when Kavorian Barnes broke free for a 27-yard touchdown run. North Texas answered back on their next drive, tying up the game. After UNT stuffed the Roadrunners at the 1-yard line, forcing a turnover on downs, they momentarily took a 10-7 lead on a 22-yard field goal. But that lead would be short-lived. Less than 2.5 minutes to be exact. Soon after, Clifford Chapman intercepted Austin Auney's pass and returned it 27 yards. Frank Harris scored a rushing touchdown 2 plays later to regain the lead, 14-10. UTSA never trailed again. The Roadrunners added 3 touchdown receptions by Zachary Franklin, 1 touchdown reception by Oscar Cardenas, and 2 field goals from Jared Sackett in the decisive 48-27 win over the Mean Green. UTSA improves to 11-2 and looks forward to their matchup in the Cure Bowl against the Sun Belt champion, Troy. What were your thoughts on the game?
First of all, UTSA is now 6-5 all-time against UNT. We finally took back the lead.
Yeah.
And I think what's most important here, we lifted that championship trophy in front of North Texas. We lifted it in front of a rival.
Well, actually, we didn't, because I'm pretty sure they all left the field immediately, but conceptually, yes.
Right, and that's where I'm going with this. That, even though they took off, well, at least the team had to take off. Even their fans, I think, had already taken off.
Yeah.
But it's just that look of, we did it in front of our rival.
Yeah.
And I think that's
makes it sweeter.
It does make it sweeter. You know what's also sweeter? It's back-to-back. Something that the Spurs never did in their championship run.
That is true.
I'm sure we could get some Spurs hate from that, but let me tell you how sweet it feels to be back-to-back champions because of the fact that it's very hard to do.
Yeah.
I.e. why the Spurs had problems doing it. This team, though, I mean, just what a team, right? Look, overall, this UTSA team, and I just want to look at us real quick, just from a more of a big picture, it's just bigger, faster, and stronger than other CUSA teams. And you saw it from Traylor in the way he recruited, in the way he was developing these guys, and in the way really he handled the roster. He started really purging guys that he felt like, look, you're a good football player, but you just don't fit with us. So you can go play somewhere else, but
yeah, he really started to build the roster with the American in mind, even before we knew that's where we were going to go. I mean, it just seemed like he was kind of building for the future.
But he's always been sort of this, I want a fast team, I want quickness. And, I should really give you some quick stats just to kind of really bring that all home. 9-0 this season in CUSA play. So we got to go undefeated in Conference USA play.
Yep.
Accomplishing your Texas Triangle.
Absolutely.
Just like you had talked about in the previous podcast. If you include last season, 17-1 in CUSA. Let's take it a little bit further. Let's go back to the beginning of the Traylor era. 22-3 overall with Traylor as head coach in CUSA.
That's just crazy.
Coaching matters. I dogged Dana Dimmel last week, but this right here is what other teams want, and it was hit home so much because of the fact that there was a quote from one of the Mean Green sites. I believe, I think it was one of the podcasts where it came from, and it was more of a, we hate them, but now we want to be them.
Yep.
And I don't think it just, like I already mentioned, it is not really just a North Texas thing. It's a CUSA thing because of the fact that look at the success that Traylor has brought in a short period of time, and that's also the kicker to it, right? Like, people can hate on UTSA football team, but it's only been around 12 years. And that stings just as much as telling them, hey, we're back-to-back champions.
Mm-hmm.
So, honestly, for me, I think a lot of these CUSA football teams want to find that trailer, the guy that's going to build that winning culture. And then second step is to find that Frank Harris like quarterback, a franchise quarterback that is going to either develop or just blossom to the point where, they're able to do anything on offense. And that's where I think we get really fortunate when we're talking about this team. Any thoughts on anything I've said to this point?
Well, and the other part of that is building that winning culture. One of the things Traylor said when he first came here was we didn't know how to win.
Right.
And we didn't. And now he's built that winning culture to the point that we can have games that are close. We can have games where we don't start off well. But the team believes in the culture. They believe in each other. And they just pick it up and they win and they turn it around. And, that was another thing from one of the articles I read regarding, or it's 247 Mean Green Sports or whatever it's called, but their affiliate. And they were talking about the culture and the triangle of toughness and how, other people look at that and it's kind of hokey and, but then at the end of the day, they see how these kids believe in it, how the fans believe in it, how Traylor believes in it, and how just having that culture can really turn a program around.
But it's a true culture because when he talks about the backbones to everything, it leads to some lesson every single week. And that's why, when I was banging last week on UTEP, it was like one of the first things that came out of my mouth was the fact that I was saying about Dana Dimel. They just don't know how to win.
Right.
They don't know what that looks like. And Dana Dimel, I don't believe, has put together a culture. So you've already got 2 strikes. Seth Littrell had put together some type of culture, but it just felt like in terms of winning, it was tough for them to win big games.
Yeah.
They can beat up on other teams. They just had problems in big games. And this is where I think, just this culmination of both Frank Harris and Coach Traylor coming together at the right time in UTSA's football history, it's special. And I think, you've talked about it before, about how we should look at these days right now.
Yeah, we as fans right now, we really need to appreciate this season. We need to appreciate last season. We just need to kind of soak it all in because we may be in the good old days. We're moving to a tougher conference. We're going to have tougher competition. We don't know what's going to happen with some of the players next year. And, we're in a college environment. The players are going to change every couple of years and you're going to have a rebuild. So at the end of the day, this may not happen for a very long time. So you just need to soak it in and enjoy it while it's here.
Speaking of hokey, everything you said reminds me of The Office when Andy Bernard at the very end has a quote that's actually really good for a sitcom. And it's, I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days before you actually left them.
Yeah.
You're right. These are such good days. And I think it took me a little while. I think if we had recorded this Friday night, I would have been totally different than what I am now because, it's given some time to actually soak in what these guys have accomplished, how they accomplished it, and who they accomplished it with. It's really, truly special. So let's go to the game just to get us even more, I guess, kick-started into this. Let's talk about the environment of the game. It was supposed to be this really packed house. So for us and our friends Lopez's, who we are always tailgating with, it was, let's get in there early. We have to get in there early because it's supposed to be really packed. We didn't face that many, long lines or anything, which is cool. Again, it might have been the times that we went in there.
But yeah,
but when you entered, what did you see?
We were in there 45 minutes before kickoff, and that student section was really full. And it was pretty impressive to see all of those students inside that early in the game, or, before the game. You could tell just from that, even if no one else filled in the stadium, that told you right there that this was going to be, a good environment. And then as the game started, people were still filtering in. I think there were probably a lot of people that showed up sometime between kickoff and, mid to end of first quarter, just because, again, it's a Friday, the timing, apparently there was a lot of traffic, what have you. But by the time we got to the fourth quarter and, they kind of dimmed the lights and everybody had their phones up and their lights on, and you could see how many people were up in the top level. It was pretty impressive. I mean, I know it was only a couple of hundred more people than we had last year, but it felt like there were more people up on the top, and that the attendance was actually going to be, maybe higher than that, just because I don't remember feeling like there were that many people, in the third level last year.
I think because it was mostly above us, because we sit on the visitor side, and I think that's where they decided to sit them. This time it was different because they actually sat them on the home side. So you could actually, when we sat down, you could actually see them up there. So I think it's just a little bit different because we forget about that. Like, there was a visibility there. I will say this, though, and I think this is where we kind of disagree. I didn't feel like it was as loud as last season. And it may be recency bias. It may also be the fact that it felt like throughout the season, we also questioned a lot of things like, home attendance. Why aren't more people coming to see the special team? Why aren't they coming to see the defending CUSA champions? It felt like a very much of a vibe of been there, done that already. Like, last year was a special one. So this one, yeah, I guess we might show up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in the Dome, it didn't quite feel as loud. Certainly not as loud as the UTEP game felt like at times with less people. But I think there's a couple of differences. One, it's a neutral site game, quote unquote neutral site.
Right.
So you didn't have the Alamo Dome announcer kind of getting the crowd, loud at some points. Where in the UTEP game, you could hear him saying, okay, student section, we need you, and that kind of thing. Because you can't do that in these neutral games that aren't really neutral.
Which is dumb.
Right. But then when we went back and we watched the rewatch, it still sounded pretty loud on the rewatch. But I also think if, looking at last game with UTEP compared to this game, we were behind with that UTEP game, and the crowd needed to get the guys juiced up, and we needed that we needed that energy. This game, we held the lead for almost the entire game. I mean, outside of 2.5 minutes, we held the lead. And so I don't know that in the fourth quarter particular, you really needed the crowd to just really kind of get juiced up and amped up. I mean, they were still engaged. They were still there. They were still watching. But, it wasn't like that, oh my gosh, are we going to win? It was like, we got this. We're going to win.
There's some tenuous moments, but you're right. I guess that's the difference, is the fact that they didn't need the crowd as much as they needed it, like in previous games. Even last season against Western Kentucky, it felt like, you're playing this highly powered aerial attack with Bailey Zappi, and you're like, oh, we got to bring the noise, or else, they may just run all over us.
And at the very end, we had let them get back into that game, and Zappi was very close to tying it up if we didn't get that interception. Or, I guess close to tying it up. And who knows what would have happened at that point. But this game, UNT got within one possession at one point in the very start of the fourth quarter, but then then UTSA scored on their next possession, and it was back to 14-point lead. And so, it just kind of felt like we had this. And that, when I went into this game, I thought this was going to be that back and forth. If we have the ball at the end of the game, we'll win. But it just really felt like UTSA came out with a different thought process this game, and we came out, scored on our first possession, which first possession the last time we played North Texas was an interception. So it just felt more like we were in control, like we really wanted this, and that was kind of a surprise. I felt like North Texas wasn't as dialed in as I expected him to be. They talked about it being a rivalry all week. I thought North Texas was really going to come into this like the revenge game, and it just felt like UTSA was like, nope, we're more prepared. We're going to win this game. We got this. And that's what happened.
I think it goes back to what I started with, which is bigger, faster, stronger. I mean, it's a healthier UTSA team than the first game, so I think that maybe kind of played into it. So let's go into the optics, because that was something that you brought up, and I kind of wanted to dig into that a little bit. So hit us with what you got.
So like I said, going into this game, this was kind of in my mind, billed as the revenge game for North Texas. Again, a rivalry game. We all know how it ended the last time. And since the last time we played North Texas, we've also had, some key injuries with JT, with Brady, Gavin Sharp. And so to see them come out as the game captains, I think would have two different narratives based on the ending. So had we lost this game, the fact that our captains were three guys who were key to our offense and were injured, just kind of illustrated that we were somewhat of a broken team, right?
Right.
You see poor Gavin Sharp out there scooting his way onto, the field, and it just was this, okay, wow, we're really this injured team. And again, had we lost, that could have been the storyline. But we won, and so it builds the storyline instead of look at the adversity we have overcome, and again, shows Traylor, being a guy that people really want to play for. Here are these three key parts of the offense that he's really trying to keep these guys engaged. They're all seniors. Only JT has eligibility to come back. He's really trying to show them you can still be a part of this team. You can still be a part of this championship. And that's why, the kids love playing for Traylor. But again, if it had a different ending, it might have looked differently. The other thing was the uniform, which is probably very subtle, but it's the same uniform we wore when we played Houston. It's also the same uniform we wore when we beat Western Kentucky, but Houston's the game that happened this year, the game that we lost in 3 overtime. Again, you see us wearing the same uniform and you think, okay, is this going to be, a similar ending, or, are we going to bring some good karma back to this, all blue uniform?
This is some interesting points. I hadn't really thought about the uniform whatsoever. I just felt like, oh, we're doing the blues, whatever. And it wasn't until, I think you talked about it afterwards. You're like, oh, yeah, we've used this one before, and we had it in the Houston game. And I was like, oh.
Well, I was looking back at some pictures, and I saw, some of the pictures from the Houston game. I was like, oh, we wore the same thing. That's not good.
You were looking at the bad juju. I was just like, are these
Being
guys...
my negative Nancy,
Yeah. So this game gets a lot, feels a little tenuous at first. There's, North Texas comes and, throws some, essentially some shots back at UTSA. Did a few things on offense and defense that we'll talk about a little bit later within the UTSA's offense and defense. But it really felt like it played out a little bit differently. And, you talked about how, North Texas only held the lead for, 2.5 minutes. But there felt like there was some possible momentum game changes.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to just talk about that a little bit with you, and then kind of go over, I guess what went right through that. Because, the first thing has to be that goal line stop by North Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. We come out strong. We score a touchdown. Sure, North Texas responds back. Then we march back down the field and you think, okay, great, this is going to be a shootout, right? We're going to score here. And then when we didn't, and we got stuffed on the 1 yard line, it was like, wow, is this going to be where the tide turns? Are they going to come march back down the field, score a touchdown, take the lead, and it's just a different game.
And I'm glad you bring that up, because right after that, they essentially had a false start penalty, and then they rip off a 56-yard run. And that felt like it could have been two different pieces of a momentum change, but right. I think looking at it now, it's one momentum change, and that certainly could have broken the back of, UTSA, because you have essentially your inside linebackers not getting off the blocks, just kind of half-heartedly getting hit by the blockers, and I think it's Keiko Ragsdale that breaks free all of a sudden.
Right, and thank goodness Corey Mayfield was able to track him down, because had he gone for a touchdown, again, I think things would be very different. We'd be talking about a different game right now.
I agree. I think there would have been some questioning of the call more than I think is talked about now. Let's go into the second quarter. Frank Harris is avoiding pressure, but as he's stepping out of the pocket and starting to run, he gets hit from behind. I believe it was Whitlock, their defensive back, that popped it out. It could have been Gaddy. I can't remember right now off the top of my head, but he pops the ball out. I thought it hit the ground. It didn't.
Yeah, just popped right into Oscar Cardenas' hands.
He just puts out his big paw. He catches it. I want to talk about that a little bit more, by the way, so put a pin in that.
Okay.
But again, to your point, you get a fumble there, and that could change the tide of how this script goes. Let's go to the second quarter, because at the very end of it, it just felt like, all right, we're going to go into the locker room up by one score. But after a UTSA kickoff, North Texas takes a while to get away from the sideline. And it really felt like both teams felt like it was a timeout. And there was a little bit of controversy because the announcers on TV said, wow, that game clock or the play clock seemed pretty fast. But I specifically told you on the rewatch, let's look at that play in particular and see if it's really controversial. Because if you go into some of these other sites, like we decided to be sickos and went to the Go Mean Green site, and trust me, if you want to see people in their feelings, go to the Go Mean Green site. But they were like feeling like the game clock operator screwed up. Game clock operator did not screw up.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're watching the game real time, you're really not paying attention. But when you're watching it on the television and you have the announcers feeding into what Seth Littrell is telling him, I mean, that's all you see because they didn't show the game clock the entire time. So you literally had to sit there and time it, or count with it. It wasn't until you came back from halftime, they kind of showed it again, and they showed the clock. But again, they didn't really call it out very well that, Seth Littrell was wrong. They just blew the game clock.
Right, and I think that to me was the big moment. There was a couple other moments in the second half that we'll talk about real quick, but this to me was the big mistake because it really threw off their offensive momentum, and it felt like after this, they were never able to recover. After this, they were playing a ton of catch-up, and Seth Littrell was asked afterwards, what do you felt really hampered your team? And he said they started really pressing. They had a game plan, which I thought was pretty good, but they were pressing really hard to try to get first downs. And that really kind of destroyed them, I think. There's a moment in the third quarter where Frank looks like he goes over the line of scrimmage. And you pointed it out to me because it was like talk about it online. But what did we see when we actually watched the game?
Oh, he absolutely went over the line of scrimmage. And had the refs really been watching and caught it, he threw over the line of scrimmage. It's 3rd and 10. That would have been a penalty with a loss of downs, which means we wouldn't have been able to go, because immediately after that, we kick a field goal on 4th down. And if we had had that loss of downs, we would have lost that field goal. Again, 3 points wouldn't have made the difference in the game had everything else been the same, but not getting that field goal could have changed kind of the mindset going into the fourth quarter.
And I think that's something that I'm trying to get to in this whole momentum changes because mindset changes. The last thing was Frank gets hit while he's kind of throwing backwards to Josh Cephas. And Cephas for a second seems to question whether he should go after that ball. And then it seems like it hits him. I should go recover it. The whistle has not been blown. So it's lucky that he was out there by himself because I think otherwise North Texas might make a play. And maybe they, again, to your point, mindset changes. There's difference in play calling, a little momentum change, and something different occurs. So certainly a ton here to see, a few key plays, but I still think that it was that lack of time management by Littrell at the end of the second quarter that really doomed and put the stake into North Texas.
Yeah. All right, before we move on to the special teams, just a couple of notable records from the game. We've already kind of mentioned some of these, but again, I think they, are worth repeating. This is the first time that we have won back-to-back conference championship games. It's only the second time as a program that we've won 11 games in a season. We had the 3rd highest attendance in school history, just over 41,400 at this game. It was also the third largest attendance for a Conference USA championship game.
A lot of cool stuff, right?
Yeah.
Let's go to special teams real quick. Jared Sackett, another just solid night. But, well, I love everything that Jared's done. Can we talk about real quick about Tate Sandell? Because you have taken a liking to him.
Well, first of all, he seems like he has quite the personality. If you just watch him when he comes on for, kickoffs, and he's getting, the guys kind of hyped up on the line, like, he just has a personality about him. And then we've all seen, how he responded when he was able to recover the onside kick. I can't remember what game that was. But, he just...
Oh, UAB.
Yeah, he just seems like he's got this, like, really fun personality about him. For the most part, what we were trying to do during the game was not allow those kickoffs to be returned by Kalen Horton from North Texas. Kalen Horton transferred to North Texas this year from Tarleton. He has had a kickoff return touchdown while at North Texas. So they were intentionally trying to kick away from him, and you saw several squib kicks, which again is not necessarily typical of what you would see from Jared Sackett or from UTSA. So there was a guy sitting behind us, and you could tell he was a fan of UTSA. He's probably seen a couple of games, but he's not somebody who has watched probably every single game. And so, he kept getting very frustrated by these squib kicks by Tate, and he just couldn't figure out why we were doing it. And so at some point I was just starting to get irritated every time we would have a kickoff and, he'd say something. So...
Okay, stop right there. She was getting really exasperated. Like, there was, like, boiling to the right of me. And I was like, okay, at some point she's going to turn around and say something. And what is she going to say? And how am I going to be held responsible for it?
I basically, turned around and mansplained to this man why Tate Sandell was squib kicking.
What a line. What a line. I mansplained to a man.
Sometimes it happens. But anyways, again, it was just fun seeing Tate Sandell out there and his personality. And then there was a moment where Kalen Horton did recover the ball, and he returned it. He only made it about 35 yards. But who was the person who stopped him?
Your boy.
Tate Sandell. He comes running, and now it wasn't quite like you would have seen from Hunter. He didn't square up and tackle the guy. He just sort of threw his body at him, flung himself across.
Don't hit me. Yeah, it was really funny.
He dove in front of him. So on the replay, it was even funnier to watch it. But obviously we don't know exactly what the future is going to hold for special teams. We know Jared is out of eligibility. We haven't actually seen Tate kick a field goal, and probably aren't going to see him play again because this was his fourth game, and I'm sure they're probably going to redshirt him. But you know what? If he can kick a field goal with some accuracy, I think it's going to be a fun year on special teams next year.
If you sit near us or even know us, I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now that I believe that AToves is going to be having a Tate Sandell shirt next season. And it's not even going to be close. I don't think anybody else is going to be close to it. All right, let's go on to the offense. Keys to victory review. It was simple. Let Frank cook. Let him be anything and everything. And he was. 16 rushes for 71 yards, 1 touchdown, 32 for 37, 341 yards in the air, 4 touchdowns. There were passes that he was making that 2021 Frank does not make.
Oh, absolutely.
And, it comes down to the fact, his strength has increased. His ball placement has increased. His ball placements were already pretty good. But I think that it's just continually with the help of Will Stein, the help of Matt Maddox in terms of, the offensive scheme, he continues to hone his craft, and he looks like a much better quarterback than he was last season. Mm-hmm. He was pretty good last season. I think people were just gushing over him last season. I wanted to see what happened this season. And this season, he's been consistent. He hasn't had necessarily bad games, and I felt like this was like the peak Frank right here. Much like the team in general. Just a nice peak performance. Because the offense goes for 571 yards total. 341 passing, which we just talked about with Frank. 230 yards rushing. That's 76 yards over the first meeting with North Texas. But let me ask you this. If I were to tell you you're going to lose JT Clark at some point during the season, you're going to lose Brendan Brady, I don't tell you what games, and this is like, let's just say before the Houston game, you're still going to play in the championship game, and I tell you, but they're going to have 571 yards of total offense. What would be your thought?
Oh, I wouldn't have believed it. And had you said to me after we played North Texas the first time that we were going to come back, face them again without JT and Brady and have 76 more yards of offense, I'm not sure I would have believed that either.
It's it's just a testament to Frank, to be honest with you. There's a lot of things we can say about Will Stein and his, the way he drew up the game plans and how Traylor, pretty much stamps his approval. But let's be honest, it comes down to Frank. If you take out Frank out of the equation, it ain't 571 yards.
Yeah.
And there ain't no conference championship game.
Well,
we've lost all these players. Frank has still been upright, made the conference championship game.
Yeah, you talk about play calling. There was an interesting tweet from Parker, the Stats of War, on Twitter. He commented and said, UTSA has like 5 plays. It's just like Novocaine. Give him time, it always works.
It's basic, but I don't know that he's necessarily wrong in a sense, but yeah, I mean there's a simplicity to it that some of the players have talked about before, but if it gets them in the right spots, that's all that matters. So, speaking of which, how about Kavorian Barnes?
Oh, I know.
28 rushes, 175 yards, and 1 touchdown.
I mean, we talked about it going into the preview. We knew that Kavorian Barnes would be the starter after Brendan got hurt. We didn't really know who would be running back to, just given the fact that everybody's been injured. And we kind of talked about, hey, do you have Kavorian Barnes sort of be that Sincere McCormick workhorse? And, honestly, that's what happened. I mean, they put in Kedrick Cobbs for like 6 snaps, and I think he had 1 carry all night. Basically, Kavorian Barnes, carried this load. I mean, obviously, Frank accounts for a significant amount of rushing yards as well. I mean, he's always sort of been running back 2.
Right.
But, what a game for a redshirt freshman. I mean, how much pressure is it to come in and start your first game in the championship game and then to carry that kind of load and really do a phenomenal job? I mean, he is a rising star for next year.
Absolutely. I mean, again, go back to the beginning of the season, I tell you, we're going to have a redshirt freshman starting at running back in the championship game, and he's going to go off for 175 yards. You'd be like, no.
Yeah.
No way. So, obviously great find in terms of Kavorian Barnes, but also great performance and great coaching to get him to that point during the conference championship game. Now, there was a little bit of shuffling within the offensive line that kind of bogged it down, yet I've already gone over the fact that it's been 571 yards of total offense. So it seemed like the only thing that stopped UTSA was itself.
Yeah.
And I just didn't see how North Texas, they just didn't respond as well to UTSA as they did the first game.
Right. Yeah, it was kind of interesting to see some of that shuffling happening. It's almost like Traylor just hasn't quite figured out now that we're healthy-ish, what's the best combination that he should have up there. But again, it didn't matter that much. We were still able to produce 571 yards of offense and 230 yards rushing.
I mean, it doesn't have to be pretty, but you just have to win.
Yeah.
But most importantly, remember what Traylor always said before this game. Healthy teams don't win titles. Tough teams do.
Yeah.
And his team is built on the triangle of toughness. So there you go. Real quick question. Oscar Cardenas has the best hands on the team, right? I mean, we talked about his fumble scoop, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of those catches that he's made, just incredible. I mean, again, wasn't quite as acrobatic as the first time, but, he had some great catches. The only thing I can say about Oscar, and it's not a critique of Oscar, it's a critique of the coaches, is, when we did have that goal line stand, I wish they would have used Oscar on either third or fourth down and put him under center like they did in the last game, because I think, he may have been able to get that push and get us into the goal line.
Clearly, AToves is betting on the side, if that's what she's saying. So, anyway, let's go into our player of the game. Look, Zachary Franklin had a terrific game as well, but he wasn't the story of the night. Kavorian Barnes had a hell of a game, yet he really wasn't the story of the night. Yet I could still make, I think, the argument that Zachary, Kavorian, even Oscar should be player of the game. But no, I'd be a jerk, I think, if I didn't have Frank Harris as the player of the game.
Right.
I guess just because he was just the MVP of the game. But, last thing I'll say about the offense and the players of the game, UTSA stars came to play.
Absolutely.
They showed up. North Texas just doesn't have the dogs on defense to have kept up with these guys. And it just became evident early on. And even though I didn't feel it was as decisive as I think we really want to make it, it was clear that they were just going to run out of gas, just like every other CUSA team has done this season with UTSA. With that, let's go to our defensive review, and let's do our keys to victory. Get out the field by limiting third down conversions. North Texas was 7 for 15 on third down in game 1. North Texas was 2 for 10 on third down, 2 for 3 on fourth down in this game. So we did a good job of getting them off the field. The problem was that early on, we weren't really getting them off the field. But that's really what North Texas needed, because if they did get a third down, they needed to continue to, extend drives. That takes us to our second key to victory: tackle, 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 because that's going to limit the rushing yardage. Now, look, I already talked about the 56-yard run, but North Texas was held to 116 yards on 34 carries. Obviously, way more than they had the first game. But that still was only like 3.4 yards per rush. So, I mean, it's still, I think, a good stat for a UTSA rush defense. Look, they came out struggling at first, this UTSA defense, because of North Texas was really running these, essentially floods to one side. And it was like a tight end going in motion and kind of going out into the flat. And it was really throwing off this UTSA defense. But there was completion after completion after completion, and then short run. So that kept North Texas in possession with the ball, and it kept continuity going. And so they were able to go up tempo. What have we talked about that UTSA struggles with in terms of defense? Up tempo teams, because they can't get signals in. And you could see it early on that, this UTSA team might not be up to the challenge to make some stops. So that's why I think we felt like it was that shootout coming, because that defense didn't seem like it could make the crucial stop when it was needed. I'll say this, I just feel like the scheme just continues to be a puzzle, because it really turned out that UTSA ended up having to out-athlete North Texas, simply because some of the schemes, they just don't run it correctly, and because of it, it just keeps our defense kind of out of whack. And what can you do? That's where this defense is now, and you can't really make any changes to get to that, to say this is how we need to perfect it. I'd like to see how this team has to change next season, because going into AAC, I don't think it can be as basic. One of the comments that Clifford Chapman had at the beginning of the season was, this defense is pretty easy to learn, and these guys can just come in and learn it quickly. So just something to think about, but want to plant that seed, because there were certainly, I think, issues there. One issue that I think North Texas fans are going to moan about is pass interference. There was certainly a lot of clutching and grabbing, I would say, even by the UTSA secondary. You really couldn't tell, I think, with the North Texas secondary, but I think they were trying to clutch grab. It's just that the UTSA wide receivers are just so good at getting away from their defenders that it was difficult for them to really get a hold of them and really kind of slow them down. But these grabs were just letting each other, like I said, clutch at each other. And it took some early hits before passes arrived, before they would throw a flag.
I mean, yeah, the best example of when they threw a flag for pass interference when, again, UTSA was on offense, I forgot who the player was from North Texas, but I mean, he pretty much like jumped onto Tyke's back and was like basically like on his back trying to, get the ball.
Right.
But again, there's just that size disparity. And you could not call that. I mean...
Well, it was also baffling because, if I remember correctly, that play, he got a good jump, but if he tries to at least go around or is maybe a little more athletic than Tyke, he can disrupt that pass without pass interference. Instead, he went right through Tyke, which is poor secondary play from North Texas. And what's really ends up kind of dooming them because they allow 4 touchdown passes. So, that's a big issue with them. 2 interceptions, though, from Clifford Chapman and Ken Robinson. You thought there should have been a third one.
Well, there should have been a third one. I mean, Clutchy intercepted the ball. There was no doubt about that. The problem was there was a holding penalty, and I think it was on Clifford Chapman that called it back.
Well, yeah.
So, I mean, he really threw 3 interceptions.
Yeah, I mean, look, those are some tough calls, things that you wish you could have back. I mean, look, Austin Ani had essentially one less pass than he did the first game, but there wasn't the explosive passing game. Like I talked about just a little while ago, they just had this like short passing game going, and it affected UTSA and helped Austin. But when you go away from essentially shooting your shot with something, a different little wrinkle to your offense, and you can't actually execute your true base offense, UTSA is going to just run all over you. And run all over them they did, even though they didn't get any sacks. That was, I think, one of the things missing from this defensive performance. As much as I think a lot of people want to say that it was like a great defensive performance, I would like to have seen some sacks because they certainly had opportunities to affect Ani a little bit more. They didn't do it. They did it the first game. They didn't do it this game.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, again, if you look at the stats this game compared to last game, and, you think about the fact that North Texas was held to only 22 yards rushing, but yet, they exceeded that substantially in this game. You would have expected the score to be a little bit different, and then you couple that with the fact that, Austin Ani threw for 325 yards and 10.5 average yards per reception last game, and then you look at this game and you say, okay, well, he threw 15 times last game, he got 325 yards, but this game he threw 14 completions and he only got 194. I mean, I think just given those stats, you would have expected the score to be different.
I mean, it was just the fact that, also we didn't try to just completely shut down the running game. There was a rushing game this game. It was just kind of bizarre that how much we changed, but it still worked. Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, North Texas scored 27 points in both games.
Right. So, either way, it's just not enough to beat UTSA. So let's go to the defensive player of the game. For me, it's Ken Robinson. He ends up with a 90.5 PFF score, but most importantly, 2 pass breakups, 2 tackles, and 1 big-time interception.
So what did we learn from the game?
I'm not sure we really learned a lot because what we knew already about both teams pretty much came to fruition. Again, we could go back and talk about statistics, but I think it's what's more important, what came out of this game afterwards, that I think is more important to start with, like the bowl matchup.
Yeah, the bowl matchup is now set. We're playing the Sun Belt champion, number 24, Troy, in the Cure Bowl on Friday, December 16th. This is the first time that UTSA will be ranked in the college football playoffs at number 25 and playing a ranked opponent. So definitely be an interesting matchup between the two. But what are your overall thoughts on our bowl selection?
I think it's a good opponent. I certainly watched Troy play against Western Kentucky before we did the Western Kentucky preview, before UTSA actually played Western Kentucky. And, there's some similarities between them and I would say maybe like San Diego State last season. They have a pretty good defense, but I think some of that could be, and, obviously I'll do the research on it, but some of that could be the fact that they haven't played as, I think, big-time offenses. And so it'll be fun to do that research because, again, I think that they're a pretty good team. I would have liked to have seen them play Coastal Carolina with Grayson McCall at quarterback, but because he's out, that's really why they got blown out by Troy in the Sun Belt. Troy's still a good opponent, so I'm not taking anything away from them. It's just that Coastal Carolina has had a UTSA type rise, and it would have been fun to see two like kind of up and coming, programs that have had some success over the last couple of years because of their quarterbacks to kind of face off each other. And I would have liked to see this UTSA defense really go, kind of toe to toe with Grayson McCall. It was more of a scrambling quarterback. They've got a kind of unique offense. It would have been fun to see, but you know what? I'll take Troy. I just don't like the time because it's not really at a fan-friendly time, I guess, if you're looking at it TV-wise.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting to see us playing on a Friday, really before, kids are out of school, people are still going to be working. It's in the middle of the day. So from the timing of the game, I don't think that that's really a great time for us to be on TV. It's not a great time for our fans to be able to get off of work and to travel. Again, being in Orlando, I'm not sure how many fans would have traveled had it been on a weekend or closer to the Christmas holiday. But it'll definitely be a good matchup. And I'll be excited to see us, be a ranked team playing a ranked team. But I think the kids are going to enjoy the fact that that it's in Orlando. And it was kind of interesting listening to Greg, Luca, and JJ talk about the bowl game. It seemed like, from what Dr. Campos had said, that they were really trying to advocate for a bowl that the team wanted, like the kids on the team wanted to play on and be a part of. Particularly last year, it seemed like the bowl was like kind of an afterthought, after our win in the Conference USA Championship game. We had a lot of people opt out because they were looking at going into the NFL. We had issues with grades. We had people who were sick, what have you, but it just didn't seem like the team was as focused and dialed in on going to Frisco. And so it sounded like they were really trying to look for a bowl and a bowl destination that was going to create excitement among the team. So it'll be interesting to see how that narrative really plays out and if the team seems more, dialed in for this game.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I think it does a disservice to actually both teams because you have a Sun Belt champion in Troy that I think, along with a CUSA champion, I think deserves more of a spotlight.
Yeah.
As opposed to a Friday afternoon game that's, like you said, it's going to be during the workday. So, I don't know. Again, it'll be fun, I think, for the players. But I think coming off the type of seasons I think both teams are going through, it would have been nicer to see them at a much more spotlighted time as opposed to, because ESPN owns it and had those picks, I think they should have done a better job of spotlighting this matchup. Take this matchup and put us somewhere else in a different bowl.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Of course, we're still waiting to hear from the Super Seniors about their decision. Of course, everyone is on pins and needles to hear what Frank is going to do. It sounded like he was going to have a conversation with Traylor today, but then I saw a tweet that Frank said, well, later in the week, he'd have a decision. So, not sure if he's made the decision and he's just holding off because he doesn't want it to interfere with the hype of the bowl and draw attention away from the matchup, but certainly be interested to see what happens with him.
So this whole time that I've heard about this Frank decision, it's really harkened back to me watching West Wing in season 2 at the very end. You find out that President Bartlett has MS or whatever, and he's, is he going to run for the presidency or not? And of course, he ends up running, right? But it's option A, he runs. Option B, he doesn't. Kind of have this feeling when I'm looking at Frank and, Traylor kind of getting together. It's like, Frank, is it going to be option A or is it going to be option B? And then it feels like at some point that Traylor's going to go to his assistants and be like, it's option B. Like he's not going to come back. And so now they're going to start scrambling or whatever. And then they're going to have this, there's going to be this press conference, like this pre-bowl game press conference. And, Frank goes, Frank steps up to the mic or whatever, and Traylor is looking at his assistants and he goes, watch this. And then he comes back and says, I'm coming back or whatever. And, all of San Antonio loses it or whatever. But, I know I'm doing a little bit more Hollywood acting, kind of Hollywooding it up, but it would feel appropriate, I think, for Frank. Not because he's like a showman, but mostly because I think he does have a flair for the dramatic.
Well, I mean, he's like a local celebrity, so we could see on a different note, we also know he's a LeBron fan, like him setting up this like LeBron-style press conference with the Boys and Girls Club behind him, you know, making the announcement of whatever's going to happen.
I've chosen to take my talents back to UTSA. Like, all of the east side and there just like blows off, and you know he's there at the dome, and certainly scenarios we thought of as we decided to talk about this.
But I'm sure it'll probably be less dramatic than all of that together. But one of the things I was thinking about earlier today is the fact that the bowl is on a Friday on the 16th, so it's one of the very first bowl games. Is that a good thing for UTSA or is that a bad thing? Because I can see it kind of playing out both ways. Like, if you're undecided, perhaps it doesn't really give you enough time to be away from football to really kind of think through it, because these guys are going to have to start, you know, practicing, preparing very quickly. They don't really have, you know, it's kind of like they have a half bye week. Because it's going to be a short week next week. So maybe you see some guys play in the bowl game and hold off on making their decisions because, you know, they're kind of still in the grind, right? On the other hand, you know, if there are people that are going to opt out, another week or two might have given some prep time for some of those backups. You know, maybe there's some people that are slightly injured, you know, obviously the big injuries, they're not going to come back. It's not going to matter. But, you know, does that give, you know, some of the other people some reps? And if Frank's not going to be there, you know, the more time we can give Eddie Lee to prepare, the better. So I think it could kind of go both ways, but I'm just interested to hear what your thoughts were.
Yeah, my initial thoughts would be, I don't know that there's a lot of NFL ready guys on this team right now. I think, you know, there are some guys that are, but they're younger. So, you know, I don't know that these graduating seniors have that. So if they decide to opt out, they decide to opt out. But to me, it's them making up their own decision on, you know, I just don't feel like playing the bowl game. And it's
always going to happen.
Entirely up to them. I mean, as fans go, we should just support them. Yeah, I know that people will disagree and be like, oh, back in my day, it doesn't matter. Like, it's not about player movement or whatever, or player empowerment. The fact is, everybody has a right to choose what they want to do. And if, you know, Frank wants to move on, he can move on. If, you know, players on the team want to go and play in the bowl game, great. But, you know, we all have to decide whether we have to go through that grind. And especially if you've had nagging injuries, and I'm glad you brought that up. There are nagging injuries that, you know, obviously we may not know of, but we're kind of aware that things might be happening. It could just be that, look, I just don't feel like I'm going to be up to 100%. Mm-hmm. I'd like to be there, but I think more grades might come into play here. Because grades certainly came into play last season, even though it wasn't really like announced, you know, obviously who was affected. You know that there was some guys that had some problems. So the question is, are we going to see those problems again?
All right, well, let's move into the breaking news for today.
The one that shocked us right before we started.
Yeah, right before we started recording, it was announced that Seth Littrell was fired. What are your initial thoughts?
I was shocked, to be honest with you. I mean, look, you know, I've called and kind of made this whole rant last week about Dana Dimmel and saying they need to move on from him because, you know, I didn't feel like he was the right guy to take him to that next level. You can make the same case for Seth Littrell, but, you know, I think from a rival standpoint, it's kind of cool that you kind of put the stake in the heart and said, no more, because they kind of did the same thing to us in 2019 with Frank Wilson, right? Even though we knew Frank Wilson was already going on a downhill trend, mm-hmm. Seth Littrell was able to take this UNT team and coach them into the CUSA championship. So it felt like maybe they just keep him around one more year to AAC, but that also feels so lame duckish.
Yeah, I mean, going into the podcast before the announcement, you know, my notes were, okay, I think he survives this year. One, because the AD just left for a job at West Virginia, so new AD's coming in, they'll give him the 1 year to evaluate, whatever. Two, he has one more year in his contract. And, he just got to the championship game. I mean, it wasn't the season. Actually, it was a better season than what most people expected from North Texas. But, once you got into the middle of the season, it was clear that, okay, they were better than what they thought they were going to be. They still couldn't, quite achieve what they wanted. There's been this rumors about, well, he was told he had to get to 8 wins this season, or he's going to be let go. Well, there was one more game in the bowl, and who knows if they would have won or lost that. But, the interesting thing, looking at kind of the fans' thoughts after the Conference USA game, there was a lot of discussion on podcasts, message boards, what have you, that, he'd really lost the fans. And they felt like keeping Seth Littrell around was sort of admitting that North Texas was okay with being mediocre. And a lot of the things that you saw quoted were the fact that Seth's got them into big games, whether it's the 5 bowl games, about to be 6 bowl games, or, the 2 conference championship games, and he's come up with a big goose egg in each one of them.
Well, he's not just come out with big goose egg, he's been blown out.
Yeah.
That's what I think what's been the most unpalatable part of it, is that if you're getting blown out, then that to a fan means you're not prepared. And, you just can't go into games like that and hope to continue to be employed, unfortunately. But,
and it's interesting, had the 2 games against North Texas been flipped, I wonder if things would have been different. Had the 48-27 score been the first time we played them, and then they came to the championship and they almost won, except for that last minute drive by UTSA to win, would the fate have been the same? I mean, you'll never know, but
I venture to guess it would still be the same, because I don't know that you can really say that there's been progress, because you could still point back to the FAU season where, they went to the USA championship and they got blown out, and then looking at the 5 bowls. I think, his fate was getting sealed, and it's like we've talked about before. It's like you kind of have had trouble throughout a semester and you haven't done really well, but you feel like once you get to the final exam, you're going to ace it. It's like there's nothing that shows that you can, because you've had like a C the whole time, right? So I think the fate was sealed, but I am surprised that they made the move so quickly.
Yeah, after the game.
Yeah.
So apparently, their defensive coordinator is going to be their interim coach for the bowl game.
Phil.
So I wonder if he's going to wear pants, or is he still going to be wearing shorts on the sideline? I don't know. It'll be interesting.
I would hope that he wears, the jeans. I don't think nobody wants to wear pants, slacks, because I don't think anybody wants to be seeing his legs anymore, but he does have monster calves. As was pointed out to us.
I feel like he's just who he is. Like, he's not gonna. It's an interim role. There's probably a snowball's chance that it becomes anything other than an interim role. So I think he's just gonna go out there and be him. He's gonna be wearing his little yellow shirt and his black shorts and.
Well, here's what's interesting. They talk about like Seth Littrell having like lost fans or whatever. But what does it say about a defensive coordinator that is kind of looking crazy, but then his players are kind of fighting on the sideline?
Oh, yeah.
Literally fighting on the sideline. We heard it, I think, was it Republic of Texas? Or it was somebody else that mentioned it.
Republic of Football podcast. It was also mentioned on one of the Mean Green podcasts that we watch. I can't remember the name of it now.
And then our friends, the Lopez's, said that there was some fighting.
Yeah, it was right in front of them.
That, they witnessed it. So, I don't. You can make a case that that Phil may not have the temperature around those players.
Yeah, it was supposed to be between Quinn Whitlock and Logan Wilson at the end of the third quarter, and they literally had to be separated by coaches. So I'm guessing that the fate of this team in the bowl game is probably not going to be significantly better. But who knows? I mean, sometimes, how many times have we seen teams where the coach gets fired and then they kind of pull it together and they rally for the next game? So maybe this will be the bowl game they win. Who knows?
Be interesting to see.
All right, before we go, let's talk about the rest of the coaching carousel that's been going on.
Let's do it.
4 out of the 6 schools that are moving from Conference USA to the American have or are replacing their head coach.
Kind of interesting, right?
Yeah, I mean, the two remaining teams, UTSA, obviously, no doubt there, but Rice is the other team. 5-7 Rice.
It's very Littrell-like situation, I think, but it's not like Bloomgren had fans to lose. Like, the fans just aren't showing up, so...
That is true. And they made a bowl, and that was not something that they were expected to do, so...
It's just interesting that this team in Rice that hasn't had very much success is like, oh, we're keeping our guy, even though he's probably not the guy, is like, yeah, you know, we're okay with him. North Texas is like, nah, we've had enough of this guy. He's been 500
mediocre
the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. Like he did. He finished it. Was it 44-44? But
I mean, there's a lot to really glean from the Seth Littrell firing, but you know, we kept it really short just because of the fact that you know you could do a whole podcast on it, honestly.
Yeah. FAU was one of those teams that fired their coach. They did announce this week that they hired Tom Herman, which I think is a pretty significant win for them.
It certainly is. Like, they went big and they got it, and I think that's what they needed.
And they also hired UTSA Assistant Director of Player Personnel, Roosevelt Maggot. So interesting to see, you know, that connection there where we knew we had the potential to lose some of our assistant coaches. You know, whenever you have success, people look at that success and they, you know, try to pull those people and promote them up to new opportunities. But so this might be the first domino to fall. Not sure. Another interesting hire that was made this week, Texas State hired G.J. Kenny from Incarnate Word. So the interesting thing will be, what's Incarnate Word going to do?
Let me go back real quick with Texas State. First of all, we get to now unfurl a Conference USA title in front of our other quote-unquote rivals.
Beginning of next season. They're going to be the first opponent we play at home, so yeah.
They had quite the coaching search. I listened to Kev Sciardello, who covers Texas State. He actually does a really good job, but he does a podcast, and, you know, the coaching search was really interesting in terms of, you know, essentially how they got turned down by Eric Morris and Casey Keeler from Sam Houston State. Eric Morris was the UIW coach, then left for Washington State and became their offensive coordinator and took their star quarterback with them from UIW. So there certainly was a little excitement around him. G.J. Kinney, I thought, was a little, to me, overrated, only because it felt like he had this quick rise.
Yeah, and he's taking UIW to the playoffs, and they won their first playoff game, but he's only been a head coach for a year, right?
Right. So it just feels like quite the gamble, and it felt like he was going to Tulsa. But then all of a sudden, you know, as I was listening to Kef again, you know, talk about the GJ hiring, he was like, yeah, apparently his name was never off the list. So always interesting, because you always think that, you know, you go one way, but there's things happening in the background that sometimes even your sources don't know what to say. But in terms of UIW, this kind of gets interesting because they could look across the city at, again, some UTSA coaches to say, especially assistants, and say, hey, you want your first head coaching opportunity. So it's not just other schools, I think, from the G5, even P5 level, they're going to be looking down at, you know, some of the assistants on the UTSA squad, but it could also be FCS level teams that could say, hey, we want to bring in so-and-so for our, you know, to interview them for our head coaching position. So it will certainly get interesting, and I think, you know, just got to stay tuned and keep our ears.
Yeah, and UAB, you know, obviously played all season with an interim head coach. They sort of went out of left field and hired Trent Dilfer. So any initial thoughts on that hire?
I think it's a good one in terms of recruiting, but I think it remains to be seen how he'll handle head coaching. I think that you certainly have to look at the fact that he hasn't been a head coach, I think, at the college level.
Yeah, and really not very long at the high school level or prep level or whatever.
Yeah, I think you have to look at whoever's going to be hiring from in terms of assistants. if he leans to more, to more of getting his, high school coaches that he had, it's going to be like a North Texas Todd Dodge situation when Todd Dodge, like, essentially was his rising, Texas high school football coach and then brought his whole staff with him. And you're like, that's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to hire some college level guys. And he just bombed at North Texas. If this is what Trent Dilfer does, I don't know that it's worked out ever if you just bring your entire high school.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see who he hires as coordinators. Another sort of left field hire was Charlotte. They hired Biff Poggi. I mean, fascinating name. But I don't think that was a name that was really talked about at Charlotte.
I briefly heard some story about him when he was in Michigan. But, when they do these stories like on game day and like The Athletic or somebody writes a story about somebody, you're just like, oh, that's an interesting name. And then just let it go. Yeah, I mean, let's hope it works out for them. If he's got some contacts and he can put together a staff, it really comes down to staff. Is the coach talented and can he put together a staff? So this will be interesting too.
Yeah, and then one of the more recent hires this week was South Florida hiring Tennessee's offensive coordinator, Alec Golish. Interesting thing here, twofold for UTSA fans. Obviously, we'll be playing South Florida next year, but we're also going to be playing Tennessee. And so now, Tennessee was ranked number 6, I think, today in the college football playoff rankings. But they'll be going into next season with a new offensive coordinator. Their quarterback's going to be gone. He got injured and isn't returning next year. So, not exactly sure what Tennessee is going to look like when we play them. But this hire has ramifications for 2 games for UTSA.
Yeah, and it should be interesting. I mean, I don't really know much about Alec Golish. I mean, I just know what they've done at Tennessee, but we'll see what he's able to do at South Florida because, obviously that's a much more direct effect to UTSA long term.
Right. And again, as we go further into the coaching carousel, there's a lot more potential for UTSA staff to get poached, particularly the closer we get to signing day. So, stay tuned for
more news.
More news, yeah. All right, let's talk a little bit about basketball. Women's basketball had another tough loss, this time against Texas State. They lost 55-60. They led until mid-fourth quarter, but they started to get into some foul trouble and just stumbled a bit, let Texas State get back into the game. I mean, credit to them, they fought until the very end, but just, kind of let off the gas just long enough for Texas State to take control.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think they're just still learning each other. Mm-hmm. We'll see how they really perform in conference play, but, I think right now they're just... I'll say this. I think Alyssa Coleman and Jordan Jenkins get a little too frustrated, and it causes them to lose concentration during a game. And because of it, they pick up silly fouls, they make silly mistakes, and that's something that you have to clean up, and you're going to need to clean up before you get into conference play.
Yeah. One of the things I thought was interesting about this game, just the competition with Texas State. There's always this kind of discussion about whether or not Texas State is a rival of ours, particularly when you talk about football. But again, one of the things that we have to remember in terms of Texas State's history with UTSA, they said this was the 70th time that UTSA and Texas State had played in women's basketball over the past 40 years. When you think about football, we talk about really our short amount of time that we've been playing, and then you hear that and you contrast it with 40 years of women's basketball. Just sort of an interesting thing. Texas State, unfortunately, leads that series 37-33.
It's close.
It is getting close. But, again, it's just sort of interesting to think about the amount of history we have there playing against that team. They've,
I think, won the last 5 or 6 meetings, so they kind of took over the lead from UTSA. But, it's kind of interesting to contrast this between Henson and Aston, right? I know Aston's only been here, this is just her second season, but, I think she's now 0-2 against Texas State, whereas Henson's like 5-1. So I think that's why you got to be careful when it comes to playing a quote-unquote rival, because you could see them beating up the rival, but if it doesn't translate to overall success, or at least the the look of overall success, then
yeah, what does it really mean?
yeah.
Again, the women will be back at the Convo on December 10th against Idaho, so that'll be your next opportunity to see them in action. On the men's basketball side, they bounced back to end the 2-0 San Antonio shootout on a high note. They beat UIW 68-62. In contrast to what I just said about Texas State, this was the first time that the men's team had played UIW. Kind of hard to believe that it was the first time these programs had faced each other. But now we're 1-0 against UIW. And we also beat Trinity, Shriner. So, I mean, we're
St. Mary's.
St. Mary's? We're kind of running the table here in the local San Antonio area. So, at least we got that going for us.
Low level. Yeah.
Our men are also back in action December 10th against New Mexico. And then, can we talk about Tariq Woolen for a minute? He had another interception today. It's his 6th pick of the year. Just absolutely incredible, the success that he's had. He broke the Seahawks rookie record and is tied for the most interceptions in the NFL. It's just crazy.
He could end up being our UTSA football's first NFL Pro Bowler.
I mean, that is just amazing. Amazing. If you guys didn't see it, there was a great article on him last week in The Athletic. Go out and read it. If you haven't done your fan vote in the Pro Bowl, vote for Tariq.
It's, again, 2020, well, actually, 2019, near the end of the season, he switches to become a cornerback from being a wide receiver. And look where he is now.
I know. I mean, just amazing. Love to talk about Tariq and all of his success. So had to take a minute for that. All right, well, I think that about wraps it up for us here on the Hail Mary podcast. I'm AToves.
Now the Toves.
We'll be back to preview our bowl matchup against Troy next week.
Birds up.